If we talk with staff, we look at our data, we can start to figure those things out and make changes that base our program to reduce turnover on the reasons that it's occurring. It won't deal with all turnover, but it will deal with some of the most apparent reasons.
Hello, difference maker, and welcome to IDD Leader, the podcast that's all about helping human service organizations retain and grow their workforce using behavioral science. I am your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Today, you're going to hear Dr. Dennis Reid share how you can increase staff retention at your agency. Dr. Reid is the author of multiple books and peer-reviewed research articles, and he's earned numerous awards from the likes of the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, the Organization for Autism Research, the Association for Behavior Analysis International, and many more. This is part 2 of our conversation. In the first part, we talk mostly about training supervisors, but in today's episode, we switch gears and focus mostly on staff retention. You'll hear very actionable insights on how to effectively target staff retention initiatives at your organization and what it looks like to affect change. This is a tricky, lingering challenge facing our whole industry. So knowing what to do and how to do it is worth its weight in gold. On another note, difference maker, if you stick around to the end, I'll share with you a brand new free resource I just created to help IDD agencies like yours take their DSP job vacancies down to 0. That's right, 0. Don't miss it. All right, here's the rest of my conversation with Dr. Dennis Reid. Issues related to staff turnover are complex. There's a lot of elements that go into that, even for one individual person, let alone if you're looking at a whole workforce. There's multiple factors. But if you could, from your experience, if there was a magic button, if you could push a button to make organizations either stop one unhelpful practice in that arena or start one really helpful practice as it relates to their role with staff retention, what would either of those be?
I don't know any magic button to push, but and I know you didn't mean that, but there's been a lot of literature on staff retention and reducing turnover. Very little research, though. Among the research that has been done, the issues that affected turnover in that agency were very idiosyncratic to that agency. So what I've learned from it and tried to apply, if we want to address retention and turnover, the first thing to do is take a database approach, meaning assess what's going on. And that is like, are we getting most of our turnover within the first 6 months of employment of new staff? Or is it occurring primarily in one group home? Or is it occurring primarily on second shift? First, we do a database assessment. And then we gather as much information we can about why that's happening. And that usually means a lot of interaction with staff. And then we implement the program to reduce turnover. And it may be any number of things, incentive-based pay for having been at the agency for 6 months, 12 months, so forth. Any number of things we can try, and a lot of agencies do different things, but the most important aspect is to have data on it. We go about implementing programs to reduce turnover, but often they're based on just, kind of cliches or popular things. We need to assess what's going on in our agency, where it's going on, and base our intervention on that, and collect data to see if we're being effective or not. Because, the profound ramifications of high turnover. And usually approaches to reduce turnover are costly, time-consuming. So we need to make sure that we're taking data and are they really reducing turnover? And I would suggest, I kind of learned this the hard way, if I've got a large agency, and like when I was working in a large residential center, we would try something in just one part of the agency first to reduce turnover. And if that seemed to work, then we would start to implement in other parts of the agency. But the difficulty with that is it takes a while to evaluate programs to reduce turnover because of just the nature of the beast, so to speak. Um,
Well, yeah, it's a lagging measure. So it's like trying to drive looking in your rearview mirror and to figure out where you're headed. Do you know if there's any research that has linked specific more leading measures that are connected to that? Maybe not, it's probably not gonna be exactly cause and effect, but um for example, I've read something, but I don't know. I don't remember now because I've read so many things. I can't remember now if this was someone's opinion or if this was, truly like research with evidence. But where high absenteeism, a strong correlation with high absenteeism, and then future turnover, um, which would be easier to track in real time. Turnover, you might have to look at the last 6 months, last 12 months, last 18 months. But if you're tracking absenteeism and, for the first half of the year, it was at such and such percentage, and then you implement something, second half of the year, or even 3 months later, you're seeing that percentage drop. Do you know, like, is that a good idea, or is that an actually research backed idea, or any insight on that whatsoever?
I think it's a good idea. It's a little bit laborious, but in the very early literature that focused on turnover in human services for people with IDD, they did put absenteeism and turnover together, both considered types of what was called employee withdrawal.
Mhm.
And it basically comes down to, uh, you know, a lot of staff would rather do something else than come to work in our agency. Um, and so, yeah, it's worthwhile to look at both of those. And, it takes some thought, but again, going back to a database assessment, what we found in one of our agencies, it was a large agency, um, that that our turnover was better when the staff we hired had lived in the community for a long time, as opposed to bringing people from other communities, moving into the community to take the job. I'm not saying that's the case in any other agency, but in our agency, that was kind of the case. Um, and so that was one variable that influenced our hiring practices to reduce turnover. In another agency that's in the literature, they found that turnover was higher among staff who had to drive farther distance to get to work.
Mm.
So they had multiple group homes and so forth, trying to make sure staff were assigned to work locations that were close to their home. So, again, those are very idiosyncratic to each agency. But if we talk with staff, we look at our data, we can start to figure those things out and make changes that base our program to reduce turnover on the reasons that it's occurring. It won't deal with all turnover, but it will deal with some
Right.
of the most apparent reasons.
Right. Are there other, besides the turnover rate itself? I hear you saying about giving a deep dive into the specifics at each organization and how important that is, and that completely that makes sense. Um, if you're in a college town and you have a lot of college students that are DSPs, and all of a sudden there's a lot of turnover in May, I mean, there could be kind of the answer could be really obvious as to what's going on. Oh, they're going home, or they were working a couple nights a week and now they're whatever. So obviously there can be a lot of value in that. Is there any, besides tracking the turnover rate itself, maybe tracking? I threw out the idea of tracking, like not showing up to work or absenteeism. Are there other types of data that you think pretty much most agencies it'd be very valuable for them to track as it relates to staff retention and staff turnover?
Gosh, yeah, kind of alluded to this. Looking at as we hire new staff, keeping track of when staff leave the agency.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some of the earliest research did show that if your agency has somewhat high rate of turnover among staff within the first 6 months of employment, that seems to be related to staff weren't well prepared to do their job. And what I mean by that is and you know how it goes, especially in residential, but it occurs in other settings too. Often we'll hire new staff, we'll put them through a quick training, but we need them on the floor, so to speak. We need them for coverage. So we put them out there. And conscientious staff, that can be very anxiety rousing because if they haven't worked with people with disabilities before, they're afraid they're going to do something wrong.
Yeah.
And if we don't, prepare them how to do what they're expected to do, it's just an unpleasant situation. And so one means, based on correlational data, like you said, not necessarily cause and effect, is that to make sure we train our staff well. And when possible, we phase them in to working directly with our individuals, our residents, as opposed to just putting them out there. And you've probably seen, various agencies, they'll have a partner process where experienced staff kind of shadows, or vice versa. One of the most important things experience suggests, I don't have any research on this, but like if I'm a supervisor and I hire a new staff person who doesn't have background in the field and she starts, at the end of her work shift, every day for the first several days, I need to touch base with her. How's it going? If there's any concerns the person has, to deal with it right then, to help make her job nicer, facilitate her feeling comfortable on the job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I have heard from a number of different agencies that seem to be doing really well with their staff retention and with their well, you touched on two things really that it seems to be a very common thread. One of them is they're very intentional about their onboarding and training processes, and that I'm probably going to misquote him, but as one of my guests had said, we'll take the hit to make sure they get fully trained. In other words, we've just decided we're not throwing them out on the floor or in the residential or whatever. We're not throwing them out there before they're ready, regardless of who else has to cover what. And in making that decision, they've seen a massive kind of culture shift at their organization towards people feeling really well prepared. And they do a lot of other things too. So this onboarding piece seems to be a common thread. And then what you just said at the end there as well seems to be a common thread, which is there's frequent informal opportunities for new staff, well, for all staff, but especially for new staff to be able to give feedback. I mean, to say what they're having a hard time with, or what, why is this way, or that seems kind of ridiculous. Does it have to be like that? Or these kinds of anything along those lines, that there's not this big time gap between someone identifies, hey, there's an issue or problem, to when they actually get to express it, if at all. That instead, it's a very short time frame between those two things. So that's something that, go ahead.
I think it's critical. It's not always easy to do. Supervisors who are good or conscientious, they're stretched thin. I mean, it's a hard job. But along those lines, if we take the hit, like you said, which in the long run, it's worth it, in my experience, make sure we really support staff once they're first getting started. If we can build into that time for them to start developing good relationships with the individual with IDD whom they're going to work with. Because if you think about it from the individual's perspective, that's a tough situation when you got a brand new person coming in, telling you what to do, putting their hands on you to help with, personal care and so forth. If we can take the time in those first few weeks of employment to let people spend time developing relationships with whom they're going to be working, and there is some research on that. We've done some of it in terms of how to go about doing that. Our experience is that goes better for everybody, because when individuals are around people they like, meaning the staff has developed a good relationship, everything goes better.
Yeah. That resonates. That resonates from my experience in the field as well, just over and over again. Yeah, that there's something to be said for that rapport piece, or the relationship piece. It's vital. Well, we'll wrap it up soon. I've got one more kind of question I'd love to have you to get your thoughts on. which is, let's suppose that I'm a program manager, or maybe an executive even at an organization, who's saying, we're going to tackle this turnover thing. Maybe we're not doing horrible, but like we see there's just massive room for improvement. Um, and with our conversation today, where should they start, or what's an idea of where they should start if they're saying, we've done something? Of course, they've already going to have tried certain things, maybe retention bonuses, different stuff. But if they're saying, I want to jump in with 2 feet, I want it to be different a year from now. If they were asking you, where should we start? What's our number one thing? I can't do 10 things at once. I can do one. What's the first thing?
First thing, this isn't, the most exciting thing, but I'd say establish a good database. Okay. Meaning look at, each group of your staff, different shifts, different locations, have a good database coming in on the rate of turnover in those situations. And we can look at the characteristics of the staff, and get that database established before trying something to reduce turnover. Because otherwise, going to be driving this big ship at this agency without an instrument panel, in terms of whether it's working or not. I would start there. And then I recommend starting, besides the data that's coming in, getting as much information we can. And if I was a program manager or director of the agency, that needs to be done through the supervisory chain of command, meaning I, as a director, can't spend enough time with every staff person. But I would want, the supervisors right under me spending time with their folks, discussing it, getting information, and those supervisors spending time with their folks. And then periodically we review all the information we're getting. And, it's kind of a loose process, but we can start to see threads. Thread may be, my staff, they don't think they have any opportunity to move up. So then we start building career ladders within the agency. It can be any number of things. But unfortunately, I wish this wasn't the case, but it's not a quick process to turn over to do it well. Sometimes we guess, or we come up with an incentive program or something, and we get it right. But most of the times, if we don't have our local evidence base to direct what we do, we keep struggling.
Okay, that's wonderfully insightful. I think that makes a lot of sense to start there. Yeah, because without the data to even know kind of what's going on, it's going to be really hard to know if the new initiative we tried. I mean, it's going to be hard to target it in the first place, but then it's also going to be hard to know, well, did it really change turnover or not? And it actually reminds me of a story where I was talking with someone, and they were saying how they had one of the ways they were getting staff was through peer referrals, right? So current employees tell their friends or family members or whatever, and they come on. And they thought that this had really helped with their staff retention. Now, it probably did help with their recruiting just by surely the fact that they're adding people. But then when they did a deeper dive on the data, they discovered the turnover rate was it was no different whatsoever. If anything, it was a couple percentage points higher with the employee referral people. So although it might be a great way for recruitment, it was not actually, it felt like it was keeping it because there was some anecdotes of people who had been a family member or friend and they'd stuck around a long time, but it wasn't actively solving the retention problem.
Good
that
point.
Makes sense.
So that drives it home. And we had one other thing. I'm doing what I said you shouldn't do, talking too much, but I think one has to accept that there's only a percentage of turnover that we can impact. There are certain variables that impact turnover that we can't control, namely the state of the local economy. Having been in the field for over half a century, when the economy's good and there are jobs out there, our turnover is going to be more. There's certain alternative. When economy's not so good, jobs are hard to find, we have less turnover. that percentage of turnover we can't control. We have to focus on what's going on with the job that is not attractive enough to keep people here. We can't impact that.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think that's a really great point. Um, well, Dr. Reid, this has been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. I really appreciate your time, and I know that every listener is probably getting a ton of value out of the things you've shared. So thank you so much for the insights and the work that you've done in this field. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you. But judging by the questions you asked, I think, you could be doing this podcast on your own with your experience and your knowledge. But thank you. I enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Wow, wow, wow. I learned and gleaned a lot from that conversation. And at the risk of sounding like Dora the Explorer, I would love to know what was your favorite part. Comment below if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're feeling really inspired, you could always send a quick email to nate@iddleader.com. As far as an action move for you that I would recommend, something you could immediately implement and apply, well, it's kind of what he was highlighting there when he talked about getting the detailed numbers on your organization's retention. When you're doing that, you can look for outliers of anything that's exceptionally high or exceptionally low. And then these numbers can serve as a compass when you're deciding what your next move will be to target high turnover and see that retention rate go up. Speaking of numbers, you're probably wondering about the free resource I mentioned at the beginning. Well, I made a worksheet that helps you identify where and how to get more of the job candidates through your hiring funnel. That's their journey from clicking on your job posting all the way to day one of employment. You can get your copy for free at iddleader.com/funnel. Well, until next time, difference maker, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.